Good afternoon, everybody who's joining us. It looks like we have some more people coming online, so we'll just give it another minute and then we're going to get started. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Looks like we still have people joining. So as people join, we'd like to just welcome everyone to today's webinar. If this is your first time joining us for a webinar, we're so happy to have you. If you've joined us before, then you know that these conversations are intended to share tips, tools, strategies around creating trauma-informed environments. My name is Kim Sanders. I am the president of Ukeru Systems. I'm one of the chief operating officers as well at Grafton Integrated Health Network. But before we get started, we got to take care of some of the important stuff, the housekeeping items. First, you'll notice that you're muted. Please don't think that that's not that we don't want to hear from you, but it just makes the webinar go a little bit smoother. Please know that there will be questions at the end. There'll be a Q&A option. So if you'll see on your screen, you do have a little Q&A button, and we would ask you to type your questions in that area. Please feel free to submit those questions at any time during the presentation. And again, then at the end, we'll have that Q&A period. We also invite you to share your thoughts, comments, or any resources that you'd like to share with the group using the chat feature. However, again, if you have a question, please use that Q&A option. Also, if you hear something that you find interesting and you'd like to tweet that out, please do that. Don't hesitate to do that and use the hashtag. Hashtag starts with you. The other thing is we do have the ability to link you with a provider for continuing education credit for this webinar. So if you're interested in receiving those CEs, please make sure that you just contact us. Also, we want to make sure that you know that this is being recorded and a copy of this will be made available within 48 hours. So today, I am so excited to introduce Josh Varner. Josh is a mental health professional, a school counselor, and a teacher serving at-risk students. A national trauma-informed speaker, Josh has helped audiences all over the country become heroes for children impacted by childhood trauma. He understands the challenges educators are facing and equips them with tools that are easy to implement and that will have the greatest impact on their students. We are so thrilled to have Josh with us today. He's going to be covering just how many students are impacted by trauma, how the body and the brain respond to trauma, and how that affects student behavior. He's also going to talk about specific tools that can be used to support students. So Josh, it's so great to have you with us. And we're so excited for you to tell us how we can be heroes too.
All right. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen here. Does everything sound okay? All right, good. So hopefully you can see my screen now. I got my master's in school. I'm gonna kind of tell you my story and then we'll get this thing rolling here. I got my master's in school counseling way back in 2003 from an awesome program at Wisconsin Platteville. But I was the GA on the football team. That means I was the graduate assistant. I'd break down film till 3 in the morning, and then I get yelled at because I did it wrong. But I really fell in love with that profession. I loved the competition. I loved working with these young men and seeing them grow. And I fell in love with it, and I actually went out and became a college football coach for about 10 years. So that's how my career started. I was a collegiate coach. Then I met this cute blonde on your screen right here. She made me fall in love with her, and we started having all these beautiful babies. And I felt like I was missing all these great life moments, you know, that come with parenting. I was working 100 hours a week, 7 days a week. I was never seeing my kids, and I wanted to be a great dad more than I wanted to be a coach. So I got a coach in. I took a job as a community-based mental health provider. And what I found when I took that job was, you know, I knew how to use the DSM-4TR. It's called the DSM-5 now. I knew how to label kids. I could give kids, you know, ODD, bipolar, ADHD, you name it. I was really good at giving labels. But what I really didn't know how to do is how to support these kids, how to help these kids. And when I was working with a lot of kids that had a lot of significant challenges, and I wasn't being successful. So I left a really vibrant career. And next thing you know, I was feeling pretty burnt out and defeated. But I was really blessed. About 10 years ago, I saw my first trauma-informed speaker, and it was a fundamental, just complete shift for me. You know, I shifted away from what's wrong with these kids and that diagnostic model to what these kids experience. And since then, I've just been on a journey to learn as much as I can about the topic. I read books, podcasts, conferences. You know, there's so many ways to learn today. About 3 years ago, I got approached about speaking on this topic. I live in mid-Missouri. I want to get Jeff City, Missouri, the town I live in, trauma-informed. So I started speaking on this topic, and then it's really just kind of blown up since then. Word of mouth spread. I've gotten to travel all over the country to share this message. And what I hope you guys get out of this today is you get a couple more, a little better understanding, you get a couple more tools that you can use to support the people in your life you're already supporting. So I really want to give people the understanding and tools they need to be the heroes in the lives of these kids that have been impacted by trauma. So currently I work in a school. I'm a school-based mental health professional. I've been a school counselor. I've been a teacher. I know how hard the job is. I'm not one of those consultant people that are going to tell you you're doing everything wrong. That's not me. I know you guys are already doing amazing work. I just hope to make you a little bit better. So that's what we're going to try to accomplish today. So when I was a teacher, I got evaluated, and the principal came in and dinged me in my evaluation because I didn't put the objectives on the board. So you kind of heard it before, but we do want to understand the scope. So how big is this issue we're dealing with? How does the body respond to trauma, and what behaviors are you going to see in your students? I say students, trauma definitely impacts adults too, but most of the time I present to a lot of schools, police officers, social workers, a lot of different groups, but I say kids a lot, but it's adults too. And then what interventions? You know, we only got, you know, a limited amount of time here, but I do want to give you some tools and interventions that are going to help those people be successful. I'll give you a warning. Hey, anytime we talk about trauma, it can be triggering. So if you need to take a pause, you know, if you need to come back and watch the recorded version, you need to debrief afterwards, you know, get a hold of me. I'd be more than happy to talk to you. I won't go into a lot of nitty-gritty details. Those are the things that tend to trigger people, but there's a lot of wounded healers out there. I'm one of them. You know, anytime we talk about trauma, it can be triggering. So if you need to step away, please do that at any point. We're going to jump in right now and talk about a real kid, okay? I'm going to call this kid Johnny. This isn't his real picture, his real name. I do believe in confidentiality, but I got to work with this little boy. It's a real story. It's a kid in mid-Missouri. He showed up at one of our local school systems. And, you know, a lot of these kids, what happens is they don't exist to the state until they show up at school. You know, nobody knows what's going on in their lives. That was definitely the case of this little boy. He showed up at kindergarten as a 6-year-old. He had holes in his clothes, holes in his shoes. He was dirty. He was unkept. He was just running around the school. He didn't really understand any kind of structure, routine, following rules. He went to lunch. He didn't know how to use a spoon or a fork. He'd never seen those things before. Didn't have any idea how any of that kind of stuff works. So obviously the school called home. They repeatedly tried to call mom. Mom never responded. So eventually they made a hotline. We call it Children's Division here in Missouri. They went into the home. The home was a complete disarray. Mom was a severe methamphetamine addict. Who knows? You know, to this day, I don't know what this little guy went through. And that's the case of a lot of our kids. We don't know what kind of trauma, neglect, and abuse they went through. But the good news is we don't need to know what they experienced in order to help and support them. So we were fortunate. The state took Johnny into care, and we were able to find what we call kinship placement. That's where a family member was willing to take him in. Johnny was taken in by his grandma. He didn't know grandma, he didn't have a relationship with her, so that provided some pretty significant challenges, but she provided him with a safe, stable home, got him clean clothes, a bath, a haircut. He showed up back to school and everything was fine, right? No, that's not how it works. But I tell you what, she gave us a really good foundation and gave us something to build off of. So that was really great. But he definitely had some struggles. So we're going to kind of follow Johnny's story throughout the presentation today. So why do we got to learn about this trauma informed? You know, hopefully a lot of you guys have heard about the ACE study. It's definitely gotten a lot more prominence. But for those of you who haven't, I'm going to go over it real quick. ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Experience. Okay. And the ACE study was the largest longitudinal study in human history. They took 17,000 people and they looked at their lifespan and they looked at how much childhood trauma they experienced and what kind of outcomes do we get later on in life. There used to be a lot of debate, you know, how many kids in each district have been impacted by trauma? How much does trauma impact people later on in life anyway? If it just happened when they're little, is it a big deal? You know, there's a lot of debate about this stuff. And I think this study brought a lot of clarity to this issue. Okay. So what they did was with the 17,000 people, the CDC partnered with an insurance group called Kaiser Permanente out in San Diego. The problem with the study was it was predominantly white and affluent. So the majority of the people in the study were Caucasian. The majority of them had good jobs, good insurance. That's how they got in the study. So it wasn't a perfect sample size, but you're going to see, you know, the numbers are pretty dramatic either way. What they did was they did an ACE questionnaire. They asked them 10 questions. If you look here on your screen, you know, if a kid dealt with emotional abuse, physical neglect, and a parent had a mental illness, you'd have an ACE score of 3, right? If you dealt with all 10 of these things on this list, you'd have an ACE score of 10. If you dealt with none of them, you'd have an ACE score of 0. How does that number, that ACE number, correlate with your outcomes? That's what they did with this study, okay? What they found is that people that had 6 or more ACEs on average died about 20 years earlier than people that had 0. So we saw a huge decrease in life expectancy. And even with this very white affluent sample size, about 1 out of 8 kids had 4 more ACEs. 4 more ACEs is kind of what we consider high risk. Okay, so it's not one kid in every district. We're talking multiple kids in every classroom in every school in America. So the problem is much, much bigger and robust than we realized. Now, a lot of people realized anyway. 4 more ACEs, this is what it looks like up here on your screen. Okay, you know, some of the things are very dramatic. 14 times more likely to have a suicide attempt, 11 times more likely to use hard drugs, 4 times more likely to engage in risky sexual behavior, 5 times more likely to develop depression. But 5 out of 6 leading causes of death, your numbers double once you get 4 more ACEs, you know, heart disease, lung disease, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's, you know, childhood trauma is actually a really good predictor of the people's quality of life. Now, you're all probably smart here in the audience. You're probably thinking, how do we go from neglect to liver disease? How does that happen? Well, this little triangle down here, I think explains it pretty well. If you get down here at the bottom of the triangle, that's the birth of a person. Up here at the top, that's death. So this is the lifespan of a person, okay? What happens is they experience childhood trauma. Childhood trauma impacts people in a much more severe way than it does when your brain's fully intact at like 25, 30, 40 years old. You know, the more neuroplasticity you have it at a younger age. So the younger the trauma happens, the more impactful it is. That's why we see double the number of kids develop PTSD and live in homes that domestic violence is present than we do active duty military people deployed in a war zone. Okay, it's not because their trauma is quote unquote worse. It's because their brain is developing in such a much more rapid way. And so what happens is these kids experience trauma and it disrupts how their brain develops. It disrupts their neural development. Okay, that trauma impacts them in a much larger way at a young age. And what happens is you'll see students, they end up with social, emotional, and cognitive impairments because of that disrupted neural development. And so you'll see kids socially, they have a hard time connecting with other people. You know, most kids have been hurt by other human beings. And so they push people away because they want to feel safe, right? And so if you can't connect with people at an age appropriate level, that's an emotional impairment. You'll see that's a social impairment, I'm sorry. You'll see the emotional impairment. That's where kids can't regulate their emotions at an age appropriate level. You'll see the high levels of anxiety, the high levels of anger explosions, and then you'll see the opposite end where they shut down in that depressive state. Okay, that's what emotional impairment looks like. And then the last one I have on there is a cognitive impairment. You'll see kids have a hard time learning. You know, when you're dysregulated, when you're triggered, we're going to talk about the brain mechanics a little bit later, you physiologically can't learn. Well, a lot of kids come to school dysregulated. They come to school and they're triggered multiple times throughout the day. When their brain is in that dysregulated state, they can't learn. So it's not that these kids aren't smart. They're actually some of the most intelligent kids in our schools, They're just missing large chunks of information throughout their educational career because their needs haven't been met. Okay. And then what happens is kids will start adopting high risk behaviors to deal with these impairments. I predominantly work in a middle school. That's where I'm housed out of in my district, Fulton Public Schools. And what you see, we start seeing kids adopting these high risk behaviors at the middle school age. So how do they deal with the social impairment? I see a lot of kids start engaging in risky sexual behavior as a way to deal with that that inability to connect with other people. Emotional impairments. I see a lot of kids start vaping, smoking marijuana, drinking alcohol, drinking energy drinks as a way to deal with that emotional impairment. And then that cognitive impairment, guys, it's way easier to get kicked out of class than it is to be 3, 4, or 5 years behind in that course material. Those high-risk behaviors lead to the disease, disability, social problems, ultimately early death. So you see it just stacks on itself. Now, we used to think that if we got rid of the unhealthy coping, we would get rid of all the negative outcomes. The latest research is pretty clear, guys. Only about 50% of our negative outcomes come from unhealthy coping strategies like drugs and alcohol. The other 50% just come from the stress on the human body. When people are stressed day after day, week after week, month after month, causes all sorts of health conditions, okay? So that's kind of how it builds on itself. That's how it happens. Here's some good news, and this whole presentation ain't gonna be bad news. Stay with me. I know I hit you with a lot early on, but your history of connection is a better predictor than your history of trauma. The number one predictor of how long you live is not, do you have diabetes, high blood pressure, smoking, drinking, any of those things. It's your history of connection. And so when we're connected as human beings, we're extraordinarily resilient. When we're alone, we're very unresilient. Trauma is not the problem. Being alone with your trauma is the problem. Okay. And a lot of these kids are suffering alone. And if they suffer alone throughout life, we're going to get a negative outcome. If we can find ways to plug them in, connect them with good, healthy relationships, human beings are extraordinarily resilient, and these kids can all be successful. So your history of connection. So don't get down on that A score. Let's get excited about building those great connections, because that's a better predictor. So how does trauma impact learning? They did a lot of research on this stuff, but basically the higher the A score, the more you're going to have issues with language and communication skills, understanding cause and effect. That's a big one I see in my school. How many times a day do I tell kids, well, how did you not know when you did this, this was going to be the outcome? Well, Mr. Varner, trauma impacts my ability to do that. Now, they're not saying that, but that's their experience, right? Taking another person's perspective, that's key to empathy. A lot of these kids, they don't realize how much they're hurting another person with their behavior. Because when you're trying to survive, you're in your own body. You can't get outside your own body and understand another person's perspective. Attend classroom instruction, regulate emotions, engage in curriculum. How about these executive functioning skills? Make plans, organize work, following classroom rules. Guess what, guys? If students can do that, they do well in school. If they can't, they struggle. It's really that simple. We know the higher the A score, the more likely they're going to struggle in all these foundational skills that are essential to learning in the school environment, okay? So what do we get? What kind of outcomes do we get? We see lower test scores, lower IQ, and what really happens to these kids is they get suspended, they get expelled, and they don't graduate from high school. That's what it looks like in the United States. And I'll be honest with you, I've got to work with some groups all over the world. That's how it looks all over the world right now. We do a really good job in the United States educating kids who haven't been impacted by trauma. We don't do a very good job across the country of educating kids that have been impacted by trauma. What we do is when they show up in our schools and we say, your behavior doesn't meet our expectations, we remove them. And what we do is we're actually reinforcing their trauma. We're reinforcing that worldview that they don't belong, that they're not good enough. They end up on the streets. They end up in our criminal justice system. Our prisons are filled with kids that went through a lot of trauma. And that's really how we've dealt with it in the United States. 1 out of 8 kids in the United States doesn't graduate high school. About 1 out of 8 kids in the United States has a significant amount of childhood trauma. I don't think it's a coincidence that those numbers are so strongly correlated, right? Once again, we got to do a better job of supporting those kids that are impacted by trauma. And I feel like that's my life's work. That's why I go all over the country sharing this message, because I want those kids to get the help they need to be successful in life. Dr. Burke Harris, I'll plug her book later, but if you have an A score of 4 or more, you're not 5, not 10, 32 times more likely to have academic and behavior problems. If you're at my school, Fulton Middle School, and you have academic and behavior problems, you'll show up on my student success team meeting on a Friday, and I'll know the root cause of your issues is trauma. Because the research is super duper clear on that's the root of why these kids are struggling. So I'm going to use these trauma-informed strategies to help that kid be successful in my school, because I know that's the cause. The data is super clear on that. Am I going to be wrong every once in a while? Sure. But guess what? These strategies are going to help those kids that have been impacted by trauma too. So we just roll them out for everybody. So let's get back to Johnny. Johnny was really, really fortunate. He would get placed with grandma. I was the community-based mental health professional, so I worked with grandma in the school and made sure we had the same structure rules so that he could learn a heck of a lot quicker. That was my role. Johnny had one of those snake charmer kindergarten teachers, where she could just get the kids to line up in a straight row, and she had really good rules, and she was very consistent with her expectations. And Johnny would break them, but she met that kid with love and connection every day. She was an amazing hero in his life, an amazing kindergarten teacher. He also had a middle school counselor and an elementary, which is crazy hard to find, but Johnny was lucky enough to have one. And they worked on social skills every day. Because Johnny didn't even know how to connect with other kids. He didn't know what a safe person was when he showed up at the school. And so he needed, somebody to teach him how to take turns, teach him how to talk to another child, teach him how to work through issues. And we're really fortunate to have an awesome person work with him on that every day. And so what we saw is Johnny getting better and better each day. Now, they don't get 1% better every day. They get better and then they backslide, better, backslide. That's how it goes. But over time, you can see this kid's trajectory going up, up, up. And it was really, really exciting. It doesn't always happen. And so when you get to see it happen, you get really excited. I was pretty pumped. But then one day, Johnny was sitting down. It was February of his kindergarten year. He was doing well. He learned the ABC song. I'll never forget, man. This little guy learned the ABC song. That was a big deal, right? He's learning, he's growing, he's following the rules. It was really exciting. He's making friends. He was sitting down in February of his kindergarten year, talking to his friends, laughing, joking. His school counselor came up behind him and tapped him on the shoulder because he needed to go have a meeting with him. And Johnny turned around and punched him in the face. I'm not talking glance and blow. I'm talking right on the nose, double nosebleed, And I was really worried about Johnny in this moment. I've been doing mental health long enough where I knew if you take kids in foster care and you kick them out of school, there's only one place they go. They end up in residential facilities. You take a kid 6 years old, you put them in a residential facility for 6 to 18 months, you can chart their lives out. We rarely get a positive outcome. So I was worried about this little boy. What's going to happen? How this meeting goes is really going to determine, what happens with him. And so when the principal called me and said, hey, we got a possible Safe School Act, possible expulsion, I knew this meeting was going to be pretty pivotal in his life. And he'd been doing so well, I didn't want to see it all slip away. So what's going on with Johnny's brain? Okay. To understand all this trauma-informed stuff, guys, I think we make it way too hard, way too complicated. Mental health in general, we make it so hard and complicated, educators don't feel like they can be anywhere near it. They get uncomfortable with it. They don't feel like they can make an impact. But they can make such a huge impact. We just have to empower them with easy-to-use tools and make it easy for them to understand, okay? I teach this stuff to middle school boys. That's like third-grade girls, right? I teach this to foster kids. I teach this to low-functioning parents. It doesn't have to be hard to be effective, all right? All you need to understand is for all the kids in your school is understand front of the brain, back of the brain. It's really that simple, okay? The front of the brain is super awesome, man. We got this prefrontal cortex up front here, okay? We have ginormous ones as human beings. That's why we're the apex animal on the planet. We have huge frontal lobes that can do amazing things. We have consciousness. We have metacognition. We can think about thinking. We can do calculus. I mean, I can't, but some people can. Art, music, bridges, roads, architecture. We can do all this amazing stuff. We have this ginormous frontal lobe that most animals don't really have much of, okay? Only problem with the frontal lobe is if you're, it's slow because you have to think, well, how do I feel about it? What do I think about it? What would grandma say if I did this? It's a slow plotting process, okay? But we're lucky because we have this back of the brain too. We have this brain stem back here. Some people call it the lizard brain, but think of it this way, guys, it's automatic. It's an automatic part of the brain. It deals with digestion, blood pressure, breathing, heart rate, all this stuff that you don't have to think about on a day-to-day basis. It's all being done automatically by the back of our brain. So you have that conscious part of the brain, you have that automatic back of the brain, all right? Now imagine we're in a big room, not doing this virtually. I can't wait to see more of you people in real life, but we'll do virtual because that works in this situation. Imagine we're in a big room, in a big hall. I'm, doing this PD for you. And we got Kim over here, my co-host, and she gets attacked by a bear, comes barreling in the room and attacks her. You don't want to be in the front of your brain during the bear attack, right? We got the admin thinking, man, how much paperwork am I going to have to fill out during the bear attack? You got the custodian going, how am I going to get the blood out of this carpet? It's going to be tough to clean. You know, Kim's got lots of friends. I met them earlier. They're all going, you know, I want to help Kim. I want to support her. But yeah, I don't think these things are going to do much to stop the bear anyway. I saw that movie Leonardo DiCaprio. I don't think I can fight a bear. You know, you can imagine if our brains worked that way, we never would have got out of the caves 10,000 years ago. We'd have been drawn on the walls, and a saber-tooth tiger would have showed up, and we'd have said, well, how do I feel about the saber-tooth tiger? What should I do? And we'd all got Scooby snapped. Us, our kids, human beings never would have got out of the caves, right? But we did. There's 8 billion of us. How do we do it? Well, we have this little thing in the middle of our brain called the amygdala. And whenever we're in a life or death situation, all this complex front of the brain stuff gets turned off. We can see this on brain scans. Nothing going on up front. The back of the brain lights up like a Christmas tree. And remember, when you're in the back of the brain, you don't get to control it. There's only 3 things the back of the brain can do, and your brain will pick which one, and it's automatic. There's only 3 things the back of the brain can do, and it's fight, flight, freeze. Your brain will pick the one that gives your brain the best chance of survival, not Kim. So when Kim's getting attacked by that bear, what response do you think the rest of our brains are going to do in that big meeting room? We're all going to get a what response? A flight response, right? Because flight's going to give us the best chance of survival. Now, sorry, Kim, it's not going to work out the best for you, but it's going to work out the best for everybody else. We'll go home, we'll procreate, we'll make more people, and we'll replace our lost Kim. And that's the system that's worked so well for human beings throughout our history, right? Our brain will pick the one that gives us the best chance of survival. One of the things that really bummed me out was that school shooting down in Florida, where that police officer, he heard gunshots and he's sitting out in his car out in front of the school. And what kind of response did he have? His smoke detector went off. He had a freeze response, and he stayed in his car. And guess what? His brain picked that freeze response because it gave him the best chance of survival. Now, a lot of us are yelling at him and saying he's a coward and he should have done this. But at the end of the day, guys, when that back of the brain takes over, you don't have control anymore. And I love history because I'm a 40-year-old male. You either have to get into history or smoking meats. I picked history, okay? And I love looking at all the battles. And you can look at every battle in human history and you'll see soldiers fight, flight, freeze. You know, and we can train soldiers, and I work with police officers on how do you stay calm in these really, really stressful situations. But at the end of the day, if the situation's stressful enough, the back of the brain will take over and it will pick one of those responses for you. So front of the brain, back of the brain, smoke detector. Does that make sense? I hope we're all on the same page there. Now, here's the interesting part. That smoke detector will remember every single traumatic event from your entire life. Now, it doesn't remember it through a conscious narrative. That'd be really sweet if it did, but that part of the memory doesn't, that part of the brain doesn't have control memories. It doesn't write down memories, okay? So that smoke detector only remembers it through your senses. What did you taste, touch, smell, hear, see in that moment? If you get that same stimuli again, that smoke detector will go off quicker this time, get you in the back of the brain and get you the same fight, flight, freeze response that kept you alive last time. That's pretty advantageous for us as a species, all right? So imagine a year later, we come back and we're in the same room and we got Kim's memorial bench over there. It's real nice, Kim. We took care of you, all right? And you guys smell the bear. Boom, smoke detector goes off, back of the brain run. What if you heard bear claws on the floor? Smoke detector goes off, back of the brain run. What if you heard a bear growl? Smoke detector, back of the brain run. You can see that's a really advantageous adaptation that our brains have made. We don't have to wait for the life or death situation to arise. We can get in the back of the brain quicker, get into a life or death, life-saving fight, flight, freeze quicker, and we'll be more likely to survive. It's a pretty good adaptation, right? The problem with that process is that brain, you never forget those traumatic events. And when you have traumatic event on top of traumatic event on top of traumatic event, and they start stacking, that's a lot of stimuli that can trigger that smoke detector and get you in the back of the brain too often. That's what PTSD is. A lot of things are triggering my brain, and I'm spending too much of my time in these life-saving fight, flight, freeze responses. And that's what happens to our soldiers. They go to Afghanistan, they fight in a war, they come home, and a firework goes off or a car backfires. When they feel that concussion, they hear that sound, their smoke detector isn't thinking you're safe, you're in the United States, that was a car backfiring. Their smoke detector remembers that as bombs, bullets, war, and gives them the same fight, flight, freeze that kept them alive in those situations. That's what PTSD is, okay? So I hope this is all making sense for everybody. So let's get back to Johnny. What happened to Johnny on that day? You know, we had the big team meeting. I got this diagram out. We talked about it. And we said, hey, you take a kid that's never been neglected or abused, you tap them on the shoulder, what kind of response will they have? Sometimes you'll see a startled response if a kid's scared. Sometimes they're going to turn around and wave at you. Why was Johnny's response so different than a kid that hasn't been abused? And I'll be honest with you guys, to this day, I don't know exactly what Johnny went through, but I have an idea. Somebody grabbed that boy from behind, somebody hurt that kid, and he had to fight in order to survive, to get out of that situation, right? When he showed up at school and somebody touched him from behind, his smoke detector went off. He had that same fight response that kept him alive before, and he used that on that school counselor, okay? Now, I don't like when we call that thing maladaptive. You know, that's the one they use that in my profession. They say, well, that's a maladaptive response. I hate that word because was it maladaptive when he was in that terrible home and he was being abused and neglected? That was a life-saving response, right? And that's all his brain is trying to do. It's trying to stay safe. It's trying to stay alive. And I'll never forget it, man, that there's nothing more personal than getting punched in the nose. The school counselor had gauze packed in his nose, and he looked at me and said, hey, you know, how can any kid be safe in our school? How can I be safe if this kid's in our school? We got to expel him. We got to remove him. That's the only way forward. But we talked about front of the brain, back of the brain. We learned that Johnny's smoke detector got set off by that touch, and his fight response was because of the trauma that he went through. When everybody in the room understood that, the whole room shifted, including the counselor got punched in the face. It went away from Safe School Act, expulsion. So what's this kid been through? How do we help this kid? How do we support this kid? How do we help him be a success story? When we make that fundamental shifts in our schools, guys, all these kids can be successful, okay? And that's, like I said, that's why I'm passionate about sharing this message. So front of the brain, back of the brain, smoke detector. If you understand those three things, guys, you can support every kid in your district. Here's a good visualization of that, guys. This brain on the left, these temporal lobes do not get developed unless we're in a loving, safe, connective environment. This kid on the right is a severely abused, neglected kid from an orphanage. And you see these temporal lobes are barely developed at all. That kid has almost no access to the front of their brain, okay? Now, this is depressing to look at. You see the back of the brain, and that's the thing about human beings. If we're in a war-torn country, if we're in an abusive home, we will live in the back of our brain because that's going to give us the best chance of survival. When we're loved, cared for, nurtured, our front of the brain is going to be active, and we're going to learn and grow and rapidly mature as a person, right? Now, this is depressing to look at, but I don't look at it as a bad thing. I look at it as an opportunity. You know, I'm an educator. We get kids in my district for 14 years, for 8 hours a day. And the research is clear. It only takes a 20-second interaction to create new neurons to the front of the brain. 20 seconds. We get hundreds and hundreds of those every single day. We may not always get the brains we want. We may get kids that went through things we wish they never went through, but we have an opportunity every day to change how their brains are wired. And that's why I'm so excited to show up to work every day and support and work with these kids. I keep this picture in my office for that reason. The first time somebody walked through this wheat field, there wasn't a path, right? When you walk through it over and over and over again, you create that path to that tree. Well, that's what I try to get really intentional about my school. Every interaction is creating neural pathways to the front of the brain. Every interaction is unlocking the front of the brain for that human being. And I know that. I smile, I greet them, I get excited. If you come to my school, you'll see me at the front of the building every day before school, every day afterwards. I want to greet every kid I can. I want to build a relationship with every kid I can because I know that's the stuff that works. I know that's the stuff that transforms lives. And I'm passionate about teaching that to other people. So fight, flight, freeze, okay? If you work in elementary, you'll see more classic fight, flight, freeze. The little kids will run. They will fist of fury and start punching whatever's around them, right? And they'll just shut down. But if you work in a middle school or high school, you'll see more elaborate versions of fight, flight, freeze. There's still fight, flight, freeze. You just got to get better at identifying. The number one versions of fight I see, verbal aggression. Verbal aggression means your students in the back of the brain, they need help getting regulated before they can learn. Physical aggression, obviously, that's a fight response, right? But the ones you see a lot that people are misidentifying, hypervigilance, hyperactivity, hard time sustaining attention. A lot of times, guys, that's actually a fight response. And think about it. Let's say I grew up in a home where dad's beating up mom every once in a while. He beats me up too. And now I got to go sit in a chair for 8 hours at school. And my brain is making me do this all the time, constantly scanning the room, looking around the room. Can't sit still, can't sit still. Why is my brain making me do that? You know, my brain is trying to find a threat. My brain is trying to find an escape route, right? Way too often, what do we mislabel in those kids? ADHD, okay? We know that 1 out of 8 kids in our school have been highly traumatized, right? But yet we're giving all these kids ADHD diagnoses that really probably have PTSD. You know, I'm not saying ADHD is not real, it's real, but way too often kids with PTSD are getting diagnosed with ADHD. What does flight look like? So for elementary kids, they'll run. And I get some runners in middle school every once in a while, but majority of the time in the middle of high school, flight looks like this: disconnection, isolation, avoidance. Once again, I've been hurt by people, so I'm going to push people away. Every human being has a need for connection, and every human being has a need for safety. These kids can't get those needs met at the same time. As soon as they start connecting, they feel unsafe. And you'll see that. You'll start building relationships with students. And as soon as you start getting closer to them, what do? Maybe they'll check out, or maybe they'll have an explosive behavior to push you away. Because that relationship with you feels unsafe. It takes a long time. The more the trauma, the longer it's going to take you to build that relationship with that kid. Okay? Disconnection, isolation, avoidance. That's how it looks in my school. Hoodie up, hair down, mask up. What are they trying to do? Trying to disappear, man. The more they're pushing, and the most traumatized kids I work with, they won't even connect with other kids because they've been hurt by kids before, adults and kids. They're pushing everybody away. Once again, if they're alone with their trauma, we're going to get a negative outcome. How do we get through that and build that successful relationship anyway? That's the challenge of the work we do. And then freeze, I see a lot of disassociation. That's that kind of checked out, numb face. Nobody's home, checked out. The reason why that's happening to students is that if you're dealing with too much emotional pain for too long, what will happen is your body just starts numbing it out. All right. And that's why kids cut. They cut because it breaks that disassociation. They feel something. All right. And they actually get a rush of endorphins. It's very similar to runner's high. And that becomes very rewarding. And they have a hard time giving that up. Okay. So get familiar. If you're going to pick one slide to take a picture of this one. Get familiar. And when you see these behaviors, guys, it's not personal. That kid's in the back of their brain. I need to get them regulated in the front of the brain so they can actually learn. Because if they're doing these things, they can't learn. That's a fact. Okay. The big thing I want you to look for too is if the stressor and response don't line up, think trauma. So if I'm at the 4th of July and I see a soldier running away when he hears fireworks go off, I don't need to talk to that soldier and know they have PTSD. That stressor and response aren't lining up. I know the root's trauma. Okay. The one I see a lot in schools, 2 kids bump shoulders in the hallway. One keeps walking, the other one grabs him, attacks him. We have cameras everywhere nowadays, right? When you ask the kid to attack the other kid, every time they'll tell you the same thing. He attacked me. Why are you mad at me? Well, when they bump shoulders, what did that feel like to his brain? Felt like an attack. That doesn't mean we don't hold that kid accountable. We need to understand the root cause of that behavior if we're going to help that kid recover from trauma and thrive. All right. This picture on the right here is my daughter, Claire. You see she has beautiful glasses on. She went to the school nurse. The school nurse flagged her. My wife took her to the optometrist. She came home with these beautiful, beautiful glasses. She was so happy. And I'm so thankful for rappers and basketball players for making glasses cool because they were not cool when I was a kid. But she was so happy to get them. I was happy for her. We're high-fiving. Life is good. All right. But then my wife was really upset. She's like, oh, poor Claire has to have glasses. And I try not to use any of my counseling skills at home. So I was like, what's wrong with people with glasses? You know, then my wife's getting more upset. And I'm like, I was wearing glasses on our first date. What do you think was going to happen? You know, and she's getting upset. And then I start going, hey, maybe use some of your counseling, use your counseling brain. Hey, is this stressor and response lined up? No way. Right. So what's at the root? What's at the root of this problem? And so I asked my wife, I said, you know, she doesn't wear glasses. So I said, hey, have you ever been to the optometrist? She's like, no, I don't know. I couldn't figure it out. Well, a couple hours later, she came back and talked to me. She said, you know what? When I was 7 years old, my mom died and I had a lazy eye and they took me to the optometrist. And when they took me there, they put these drops in my eyes and it burned and I cried and I cried and I was all alone and no one would comfort me and no one would help me. Well, guess what, guys? 30 years later, do you think her smoke detector forgot when she walked in the optometrist? It did not forget. And here's the thing about being triggered. You don't get any of the memories. You get all the feelings and sensations of being that 7-year-old girl without any of the understanding of why you feel that way. That's what it's like being triggered. None of the narrative to understand why. So here's my wife feeling like a 7-year-old girl who just lost her mom who's all alone and no understanding of why she feels that way. Okay. And normally, you know, a lot of sad faces in the crowd during this part of the talk. Trust me, my wife's doing real good. She's married to me. Things look real good. Okay. But it was really healing for her to understand where that pain came from. And guess what? We found that trigger. So what do we do this year? I took my daughter to the optometrist. and we just remove that trigger from my wife's life altogether. Okay, and that's what we want to do with triggers. What's setting off that smoke detector? Can we remove it? If we can't remove it, we got to teach the kid how to cope with it. That's what we do with triggers. Teach them how to cope or get rid of them altogether. Okay. Some of the most common ones I see, by far the number one trigger, guys, is breaking routine. You know, if I've experienced a lot of trauma, if I can't predict what's going to happen next, my brain assumes it's more trauma. But if I know step by step what's going to happen each part of my day, it helps me feel safe. That's why routine. Okay. Feeling out of control, being rejected are very common triggers. Anytime you're in a place with a lot of people, loud places, large groups can be triggers for a lot of our students, because how can they know that all these people aren't going to hurt them, that they're going to be safe? So a lot of kids, assemblies, hallways, things like that, we got to put modifications in. And really, guys, what it comes down to is, you know, the school staff paying attention. And you'll find them. I promise you, if you just pay attention, you'll find them. They're always triggered when they go to lunch every day. Okay, well, let's do a modified lunch. They're always triggered after they're in the busy hallway. Okay, or maybe there's a certain student or certain teacher. Let's figure it out. Let's get them the help and support they need. It feels daunting at first, but I've had schools find all kinds of them. I had one where I worked at the school, and they figured out that whenever it was rainy, they would go on the side of the building because they want the kids to get wet. Whenever they took one kid in the side of the building, his whole day would be awful. He'd tear up the whole school. So their modification was meet him with an umbrella at the side of the building and walk around to the front of the building. And when they kept his routine the same, he didn't have any problems. Now, that's the thing about being triggered. Most of the time, it doesn't make sense because it's not ran through the conscious part of your brain. It's just that smoke detector remembering what you went through a long time ago. Okay. So what's triggering your kids? Figure it out and either remove the trigger or teach them how to cope. That's what I do every day. Remember, triggers are sensory information. I've had it where a teacher's deodorant was the same as an abusive boyfriend of mom's. And so whenever the student smelled the teacher, they were triggered. Well, we switched to deodorant and everything was fine. So it can be any sensory information, guys. Pay attention. You'll figure it out. And remember, it's not personal. I used to take student behaviors personal. I used to think they're giving me a hard time. And now I realize they're not giving me a hard time. They're having a hard time. There's a big difference, right? And I don't take it. I don't get upset. I just go, that kid's dysregulated. How do I get him well regulated again? That's the process I go through, where I used to take it personal. Here's the good news, guys. The brain is constantly changing throughout our lives. That's what neuroplasticity is. The research is really clear. That's why I love working with young people. Their brains can change so rapidly. The younger we can have the intervention, the better the outcome. But really, anybody that's school aged up to 18, really up to 25, we have extraordinarily malleable brains. We can recover from trauma so much quicker when we're given the right environment as a child. That's why schools are so critical in this process. Now, Dr. B.D. Perry's found that short interactions rewire the brain actually much quicker than long ones do. And that's what we get in schools. We get a lot of short interactions. And we can be focused on making these positive connective interactions. We rewire the brains for safety to the front of the brain that much quicker. So what I do is I train teachers on how do you say hi to every kid before they walk into your class. You're creating therapeutic moments. How do you greet the kids as they come into the school every day? How do you spend 5 minutes a day talking to kids about their favorite thing? All those relationship building things wire their brain for safety, love, and connection, where they can learn and be successful. But everybody these kids talk to throughout the day can provide therapeutic moments. Bus drivers, lunch personnel, youth group pastors, you name it, coaches. It's amazing. Coaches actually have a really, really unique position. Dr. B.D. Perry is the best trauma expert in the world. I think he talked about this. He felt like if we could get 5% of our coaches trauma informed, it'd make a bigger impact than doubling the number of therapists. But if you think about it, guys, the reason why it makes an impact, those kids get 2-3 hours a day at their coach. Think about how quickly that brain gets rewired when all of our coaches and our school personnel are trauma informed. I love Batman because he's got a tool belt. That's what I try to do with my audience, is give them tools to be able to be the heroes in these kids' lives. Okay, I'm a big believer in evidence-based counseling. Not all counselors are equipped to be able to deal with trauma and PTSD. My favorite one that I recommend to a lot of people is EMDR. Stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing. It's widely available. Okay, and it works really, really well for folks with PTSD. Those other prolonged exposure and cognitive processing therapy are both very good too. They're just harder to find. My wife's favorite therapist is Target. It's about $100 a session. Don't forget the Starbucks, guys. That's definitely part of the treatment. Interventions. Let me see. So how do we well, I'm gonna go through these real quick. Well, the first thing I do when I have an upset student is I ask myself, are they in the front or the back of the brain? And every single time I answer, they're in the back of the brain. So why do I ask the question? Because it reminds me that kid's in the back of the brain. All I want to do is calm them down. Calm creates calm, chaos creates chaos. I don't want to try to change their behavior. That's the mistake we make. We jump right into changing their behavior and we talk a lot. Well, guess what, guys? When they're triggered, they can only process about 15 words. They're not hearing any of the stuff you're saying. We want to use our 15 words to get them calm. That's all we want to do. Calm, calm, calm. Now we'll come back around and learn from their behavior later on. We got to calm them down first. Okay. That's why I love Dr. B.D. Perry's regulate, relate, reason. Whenever you have a student in the back of the brain, regulate. That means I got to calm the fight, flight, freeze response. I do this with coloring books, going for walks. One of my new favorites, we have these little scratch off tickets I use. Some kids talking about their problems helps calm them down. Use a coping strategy. Second, relate. I want to connect and have a close relationship with them. I do that by typically by listening to them when they talk to me about what happened, how they got upset. And I don't validate the behavior, I validate the feelings. And then lastly, reason. That's where now they're back in the brain, they're well regulated. Now I want to talk to them about what triggered them, what their body feel like before they lost control, because everybody's got an early warning system. I want to teach my students to recognize theirs. And then we want to talk about what they could have done differently. All right. And then we want to repair the harm. Kids don't learn by being removed. They learn by fixing what they broke. And so, a lot of times it's apologizing to somebody, fixing property they broke, whatever it might be. When they repair the harm, they tend to learn a heck of a lot quicker than being secluded and removed. Here's some other strategies I use. I love the coloring books. I love the dot to dots. How Drake are you feeling today is a great way to get high school kids to open up about what's going on with them. I love starting class with a 5-minute mindfulness YouTube video. Don't make them close their eyes. That can be triggering, but everything else is really good about those videos. Get them all calm, get them in the front of the brain where they can learn. Lavender is really good if you have anxious kids. Cinnamon's really good if you have depressed kids. Quickest way the brain is through the nose. Movement, movement, movement. Never take away movement, guys. Movement is essential. I love biodots. They all they do is measure hand temperature. It's a great way for students to learn about their emotions because the dot will tell them when they're dysregulated because their hands will be colder, and they can practice using a coping scale and changing the color of the dot. A lot of these kids feel like they have no control of their lives. The biodot teaches them you can control how you feel, use your coping strategy, and see it on the dot. I've never had a kid turn down a biodot, K through 12, never seen it in my life. And really, it's like getting Nintendo on their hand. They like them. Teachers like them. They're really great. You can get them on Amazon.com for like 20 cents a dot. It's a great, great tool. Number one idea, though, I want you guys to take away is trauma. The biggest issue is it's a separating problem. The answer is connection. Youth groups, sports, clubs, band, activities, plug them into somebody. You may not be the person. I'm not the right person for everybody, but I'm sure as heck going to get really intentional about plugging them in with a person if I am not the right person, right? So teach them relationship skills, conflict resolution skills, smile. This is the number one superpower you got right on your face. Smile, smile. Every time you smile at a kid, you tell them they're loved, they're cared for, they have value. Smile all the time. And once again, do not let them be alone. Trauma is not the problem. Being alone with trauma is the problem. Okay, here's some good apps. Never take away PE or recess. Movement, movement. Bilateral stimulation, okay, which is any movement across the midpoint, and rhythmic movement. So think about band, sports, a lot of rhythm. That stuff all heals the brain from trauma. Never take away their movement. Never, ever, ever take away their movement. Okay. Here's some good books. Here's some good podcasts. I want to let you know Johnny is successful. He's a middle schooler today. He's got friends. He still lives with his grandma. He's doing really, really well. He's doing well because he had so many heroes in his life. That's what it takes. Real connections, real people. That's what makes the difference. I love talking about post-traumatic growth. It's kind of on the bottom right-hand corner there of your screen. But people that experience trauma are not less than. If we can get the right help and support, we actually become more than. And I've seen that with so many people all over the country. I've experienced it in my own life, where you go through tough stuff, you get a mentor, you get a helper, and you wouldn't even wish that stuff away as an adult because it made you more empathetic, it made you more resilient, made you a better person. And all of our students can experience that with the right help, love, and support. And I love talking to kids about their superpowers. What superpower did you get? Because you went through some tough stuff. And they'll tell you, yeah, I get all my all my siblings ready. I'm very mature. I had to get my own apartment when I was 15 years old. Like, the stories are incredible. Celebrate those stories, celebrate those kids, because they're not less than, they don't need your sympathy. They need your connection. They need your relationship. That's the stuff that works. The more healthy relationship a child has, the more likely they'll recover from trauma and thrive. Relationships, the agent of change, the most powerful therapy is human love, connection and love. If it's not working, increase the dosage. That's the stuff that matters. You don't need a mental health degree. You don't need a da-da-da. You need to connect with kids, love kids. That's the stuff that's going to make the impact. Ultimately, guys, you're all heroes already. I hope that you're just a little bit better. I hope you got a couple more tools. You got a couple more ideas. Obviously, we're a limited amount of time. I couldn't go through everything today, but this is my contact information. So if you have, if you'd like to book me to come on speak with you, if you got questions about a kid, if you need help finding a therapist, shoot me an email, joshvarnerconsulting@gmail. Follow me on Twitter. That's my cell phone number, guys. I want to see kids be successful everywhere, not just in my school. So if there's anything I can do to help and support you, please don't hesitate to reach out.
My goodness, Josh, thank you so much. And please, everyone, stick around for just a couple more minutes. We have an opportunity to ask Josh some questions. So, Josh, I love you. You are maybe my new hero, but we got to talk about this bear attack.
Yeah.
Right,
yeah.
right. You leave me and then get a memorial bench. Like, I need a little fight, Josh. I need a little fight.
You'll probably get a freeze response, Kim. That's your best chance. Seriously, that's what, when we're overpowered, typically we go freeze. Hopefully that bear chased one of us and you got away. So that
my buddy Alan Scott just said he would save me. So Alan, I appreciate that.
There we go.
I appreciate that.
He's a hero.
Yeah, absolutely. So couple questions. We had a question come in about what about people who are in more of the medical field, or if there's a medical procedure that has to happen, and we all know that people sometimes have been traumatized through those procedures. So right. Someone may be being given directions of things they have to do for a medical procedure that we know might be time limited. Have you ever had experiences, even with kids, with medical procedures and how to help them if they've been traumatized?
Yeah, I mean, I think really the treatment to any trauma is going to be really, really similar, right? So yeah, you could be traumatized by your own medical procedure, having a family. I know for a lot of us, hospitals tend to be triggering places because we've had to go there when people are hurt or sick or unwell. And so if somebody has lingering effects, normally I look at anything outside of 6 weeks. If you're not kind of returning back to normal after 6 weeks, let's go out and seek some professional help. That EMDR can be really, really helpful if there's something that's triggering you. I know, for example, my wife went to EMDR because she had an abusive father, and my deep voice, when I got loud, would trigger her. She went to 3 sessions of EMDR. 3, that's it. 3 hours of therapy. And that trigger's gone for her now. So that stuff can be really powerful. If you know what the trigger is, you know where it came from, EMDR can be really, really fantastic therapy for you.
Yeah, great. I think the other thing is maybe we also need to put our heads together around how we can help with the medical community, right? So I think just behavioral health, but maybe like general medical may not be as aware of the importance of understanding this.
I agree. And then, I thought you were going a different direction. This is big too with COVID. Those folks have been so traumatized in their line of work, seeing so many terrible, stressful things. And we really need to help those folks recover. And I know, like, for a lot of people, we can't heal until we're safe. And, we're not really through this thing yet, but I definitely think our medical folks are going to need a lot of love and support. And they do now, and they're going to need it continually because this is a really tough thing they went through.
Yeah, absolutely. There's, we are sort of preaching all the time around the idea that it's no better time for us to take care of each other. That's for certain. So we have another question. If you are a teacher and you're seeing these behaviors, how do you approach parents? What do you do if you know there's been some sort of trauma? So what do you do in that case? But then what do you do if you're not clear if there's been trauma?
Well, and here's the great thing about you don't need to know in order to use these tools to be able to help and support them. And so the first thing I always start with parents is I want to build the best relationship I can with them. I know a lot of times I used to view parents as an adversary or the thing that caused these problems. The thing I've learned over the years is almost all parents are doing the best they can with the tools they have. A lot of them, they didn't get the things they needed growing up. And so you can't give your children what you don't have, right? And so I've done parent nights where we educate parents on these things. It actually goes really well. They start understanding how that stuff gets passed down generation to generation. If that's not something that's feasible, I think just talking to them about some of these strategies, about things like routine, how that can help them, encouraging them to seek out outside professional help when possible. Finding the things that are being successful in school and see if you can replicate them at home. But I always want to partner with those parents whenever possible, and use your counselors, your mental health folks in schools when necessary to do that. But that's big. We really got to work together. As soon as it becomes an adversarial thing, I know I have to hotline people all the time, and I always try to repair that relationship afterwards, because if I'm gonna get the outcome I want with the kid, it's a lot easier when I get the parent on my side.
Absolutely. So there's another question that's around, and this is something we face when we're teaching Eucharo all the time, and the question is related to, what suggestions do you have to help classroom teachers recognize that their interactions maybe aren't the most therapeutic, especially if you have someone that's maybe a little bit more rigid, so, right. And it's that trying to change that mindset.
Right. And that's where people are doing the best they can with the information they have. And a lot of people grew up with this punishment model that we can punish human beings into being what we want them to be. This is very popular in the United States, this idea that we can mold people with punishment. And the bottom line is it doesn't work. If it worked, all we do is send them home and they can come back better. It doesn't work. Look at our prison system, 70, 80% recidivism rate. It doesn't work, right? And so it's really through education. And that's why I love sharing this message with people is getting them to understand, hey, this is where that behavior is actually coming from. You can't punish the trauma out of somebody. It doesn't work. Hey, how are we going to build that connection? How are we going to build that relationship? Because that's the stuff that really works. And so there's always going to be some resistant teachers in every building. But what I found is that the more educated they get on this topic, the more it shifts their paradigm, the more success they start having with kids, and it just kind of steamrolls from there. But I think it comes from good quality PD and understanding to get them on board.
Yeah, and Josh, I'm sure that you face this too with your experience and your background, but really so often we come to work with our biases on how we were raised, and so then sometimes it might take people in administrative levels to bring forth a new idea. But what do you do if you find that there are teachers who are sort of hungry for this change, but maybe the administration's not seeing it?
Well, yeah, it is hard, because I'll be honest with you. I used to go to counselor conferences all the time, and they would try to book me, and their principals would be like, no. And so I said, why am I spending my time with teacher conferences? I just go to principal conferences exclusively now, because I know if I can get the admin to buy in, I can get the whole building, the whole district to buy in. And so I agree, it is hard. This is the thing I'll tell you. I've worked in untrauma-informed schools. I know I still made impacts in kids' lives, even if I was doing it by myself. But if you can get your staff on board, it happens exponentially quicker. I've seen kids that were almost animalistic in their behaviors become very calm, successful kids in our school in I'm talking like 6 months periods, because we got everybody creating these therapeutic moments, these smiles, these connective opportunities, and their brains get rewired so much quicker when you get everybody on board. So the goal should always be the whole district. A lot of times it starts with one person, and then it goes to one building, and then it's one district. I mean, you can always be that fire in your district, in your school, in your building. But yeah, if the more of us we can get on board, the quicker it happens, man. And that's where ultimately, like, we should want our whole communities to be trauma informed, because
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so do you have any suggestions on how to open the dialogue with the so we sort of just talked about that with the admin.
And if you want some good books, and there's some really good books on there, I would, anything by B.D. Perry. He's got 2 really good books. You can get an administrator to read a book with you, or maybe you can take this recording we just did, show that to them. Maybe you can get 40 minutes their time. Hey, I think this is important. I ain't trying to hit them over some of that information. You might be able to get some folks, but I understand where it's an uphill battle. I've been in schools like that.
Yep. Okay. So one more question. We have someone who's asking, well, what about psychiatrists? Do we feel that psychiatrists know to look for the trauma, again, instead of that labeling that you talked about at the beginning? And because sometimes they're we want a quick fix. And so sometimes people may be just looking at medication to fix the problem versus digging into what the trauma might be.
So medications can't fix PTSD. They can mask the symptoms, right? And so I'll be honest with you, I've worked with a lot of psychiatrists that I felt like over-medicated kids. I've worked with a lot of psychiatrists that were very untrauma informed. There's really a fracturing going on in the mental health world right now. And it really happened with the DSM-5 because it didn't address childhood trauma at all in the new DSM-5. And so you have a lot of mental health professionals that are saying, hey, the DSM-5 is a little bit antiquated. We've noticed that trauma is at the root of the bipolars and a lot of these, mental health conditions. And then you have a lot of people are just looking at the old way and saying, hey, I'm going to give you this label and give you this medication. That's the best tools in our toolbox. So not everybody's going to agree with me. There's a lot of mental health folks that don't adopt the trauma-informed stuff. That's fine. I can just tell you from, doing this for a long time, what's worked for me and what hasn't worked. But the other thing I'd say is, check to see, if your psychiatrist has any connections with drug companies. You'll find that a lot of them do a lot of consulting and speaking and get paid very well by these companies. And I think there's a lot of conflict of interest in the psychiatry world. I'm not trying to diminish the profession as a whole, because I know some that are doing amazing work that won't take a free lunch from somebody, but I've also met other ones that get $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year. And I think, man, how can you be unbiased, in my opinion? But I'm just being transparent. So
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I think we're about at the end of our time. I would like to remind everyone that Josh's information is in this presentation.
Right there.
Right. As well as Ukeru's information is here. The great thing is we're going to have this on the Ukeru website. Probably will be on social media as well over the next 2 days. So if you want to find that information, it'll be there. The other thing is we are offering CEs. If you just reach out to us here at Ukeru, we're happy to link you to the university that's providing those, an opportunity to get those. And Josh, man, I hope this is just the start of a lot of other stuff together. This has been great. Like it's wonderful, and we're so appreciative to have had you here today.
I appreciate it too, Kim. Thanks for the megaphone and the opportunity, and I hope that I get an opportunity to connect with some of you folks out there today too. And that's what it's all about for me, man. We're all in this thing together. We all want the same outcomes. Let's work together to make it happen.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you, everybody, so much. Please stay in touch with us. Thank you.